Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another session from the Wise Asylum. Ooh, what has gone on with Rupert Law, by golly. Well, I think you can all now see who he is, where he's at, and why he wants Farage to join forces. He's made it very clear that he's a Zionist all the way. So, at least you know what you're getting. You know, the game on the table now is Zionism, Islam. Oh, what a jolly show. It's just ridiculous, isn't it? No England. There's no side of England or Blighty or none of that. No, it's pick your team. Both of them are foreign, and neither of them have got good intentions for anybody outside their own. So, it's not good. And, of course, you could tell it was just a little bit too slick. Listening to Rupert Law, or Rupert the Burr. It's a shame, because he's obviously telling you everything you want to hear. Because that is exactly what we want to hear. But he shoved his entire ship in the harbour at Tel Aviv. So at least now you know you've got Farage, you've got Law, you've got Tommy the Tit, all pushing to move us under Trump, which means, what does Trump represent? Well, he represents the no-hide system in its entirety. And they're saying, if you don't follow us, well, we're going to put our front in first, and they're going to cause major jolliness and all that, like these Muslims, or Mohammedans, as they're really called. It's take your pick time. All the state agencies are operating in accordance with that gig. It's quite ridiculous, really. But when you start to recognise that actually it's all coming under a command, it's all being played out in accordance with the will of the PCIs, then it does make perfect sense. So they're really trying to force you. Pick your Sharia or your no-hide. Sharia's only covering no-hide and it's temporary anyway, but if you go with no-hide, it's direct. We'll come in and wipe the floor with them. It's that kind of a gig, innit? Northern Alliance situation. Which is why, if you look at Nostradamus again, you can see why they were allowed to run riot across Europe before they're dealt with. So it's quite a spiffing plan, I have to say. It's a very good plan, actually. Full marks for those that came up with that at the Cauldron. It is an extremely excellent plan, and I have to say, hats off to your audacity. Never mind. But I'm not fooled, unfortunately. Well, fortunately, I'm not fooled. And I'll still bang on for jolly old England. Thank you very much. And people have said to me, why don't you do this? Why don't you go into this? And it's like, well, every time I look out there is no energy anywhere near what it is that I'm presenting. People are still one side or the other, or just running around on whatever hate they have on a personal level and jumping on board with anything that makes them think that they're doing something. So I'm not seeing any energy out there that would be interested in what little old me's saying. And until that time, if it comes about, there's not much point in me trying to do anything in that sense. Just keep on doing what I'm doing, which probably is more important anyway, I would say. And away we go. So that's the bad news for the week, I suppose you might say, if you were putting hope in the old Rupert the Burr there. It's not brilliant. But never mind. Take what they're saying, and we just need to form it ourselves, because that is what we want. It is our right, even under occupation. to expect what it is we have been born into, and which, of course, it's neither Zionism nor is it Mohammedanism. It's none of these two. So we need to get a grip, people. You know, more people need to get a grip on that. You stop listening to these shills that are just taking you down, dead end after dead end. And you do put your hope in them. You put your money into them, and your faith in them. And it's because of the way they play the system, the emotions on you people especially, which I won't do. You got to come to me on intelligence rather than emotional blag, because you need to understand what it is that's being said. Because if you understand what's being said, you'll understand and know exactly what to do, all by yourself. Right, so tonight is an interesting one. So in the week I started going through some of my old notes. But then I found a really succinct and definitive piece, all on its own, which I thought, it covers the whole shebang in its entirety. We'll use that instead. So we've moved on to another thesis on, but this is the definitive exploration of the Khazars, the Khazar kingdom, and just what's actually gone on in there. So it's a very important and in-depth paper, in truth. So full marks to the guy that's written it, which of course I'll cite on the thing. But the thing is, we don't have to go through the whole lot of it, let's be honest, but it'll be up there for the record. It'll be there if people wish to further their knowledge on what these Khazars are, what are they responsible for, and such. And, you know, if we can start to understand one thing, and that is that the cult of Baal, or what it really is the cult of Tanit, which was his consort, and outlived him when he was his earthly god self, or Baal Hamon this is, and she basically became what everybody was calling in when they offered sacrifice and worship to Baal. So Tanit is the whore in question, and these people are Baal worshippers or Tanit worshippers and collecting humans for the childless one. And so when you hear this, the whore of Babylon, you must come out of her, and people go, it's the Vatican! Well, okay, Baal has took over Vatican now, so today that definitely makes sense, but I think in the past that certainly wasn't the case, but unfortunately it is now. So Tanit is the one that these elites actually worship. This is the entity that they sacrifice to, and all the nonsense that you've come across in relation to human sacrifice, blood drinking, and eating humans. It's all down to Tanit. And of course, they've took control over all the religions, so that they have the religions believing that the priesthoods at the top end, this is the inner circle, of course, are operating in accordance with the outer circle religious beliefs, but actually what they're doing is ensuring that the three clash, or let's say two clash, because clearly they want you to pick a side, which, you know, it's going to be 2v1. And you know, it's sad to see, but the influx of these Mohammedans now on the scale that it's coming in at is quite ridiculous. You walk around your own town now today, and you know it's not right. And the attitude I've seen on some of these is quite, it's not good. Let's put it that way. So you can see what's coming down the line with this. But if you can understand that it's all being carried out by the one and the same mindset or priesthood as you want, the inner circle, then at least you can understand why they do what they do. But the trick is to work out that they're actually controlling Christendom, Judaism, and Mohammedanism. They're controlling the three. And the Third World War is about the clash of the Zionists and the political Islamists. But all Islamists are political because Islam is a political system. And, people go on about it being a religion of peace and such and that. Well, that's how it portrays itself. But in the same way that it portrays itself as a better financial system and uses one phrase to cover that, which is, we don't charge usury. Well, you don't. But you don't charge usury because you're only handing out the cash to your own, who are then expanding the bank, the mosque, which covers then the real sort of terror of that bank is its extortion of the communities. And that's how it gains its money. Now, here in the West, what makes it even more ridiculous, especially here on Blighty, is our estates are paying these immigrants free money to then hand over to the bank, which is expanding its capital. So it's just another bank, and it serves the same elites, but only this time it's got its own adherents who rally around it because they believe it's a religious thing. Well, it is. You just miss out the bank bit. But I know Muslims that have been born here, and even though they might not know it to that degree and see it in those terms exactly, the one thing they have told me in time is that they are extorted, they are forced to hand over money, and if they don't, they're ostracised, which makes perfect sense, because that is how religion tends to work. And of course, being the newest, they're way, way beyond the other two for understanding that is actually what's going on. So it's a sad state of affairs. None of these immigrants are innocent because already they come in knowing they're illegal. There's been an interesting piece coming out of America where one guy went undercover dressed as a Muslim with the veil and everything on and went to vote in Minnesota. And he went there and explained he was a Muslim. Yeah, that's fine. You can just come through. He said, I have to vote for 8 of my family. Is that all right? Yeah, no problem. No ID. No quiz, no question. This guy went in and put 9 votes in the gig. So, if ever you wanted to know why these immigrants are being brought in, A, it's for new estates, and B, it's for they'll do whatever they're told. Because in most cases, they're indentured servants. They're not paying for their entry into this country until they get here and start working for the for the Muslims that live here. So it's symbiotic. It's all playing itself out. None of them are innocent in that sense, especially because they're handing over their money. But then our state is handing it to them to hand over to that bank. And this is how they switch things. This is how they can play a replacement ideology and yet still claim that it's not really that, because they don't expect people to see it in those terms. But that's exactly what's going on. And of course, as I've said before, today's Quran in the West, especially so any Muslims that have been here in the West since 1924, are operating to a 1924 translation, which sanitizes everything. So they're being played. They're being played in a huge way. Because, of course, the ultimate game would be for the Zionists to collect everybody onto their side. And I have to say, when you look at the doctrines, even though I know exactly what they're doing, if you have to choose, you wouldn't want to be choosing Islam because of such as... Oh, that's an interesting one. The Bushes meeting Adolf. The young George H. Bush, William and Prescott all meeting Uncle Adolf there. And this is real stuff. This is being preached today by a black Muslim. And I've said this before, when you actually get into the doctrine of what it is, this is how it works. It invades slowly. Once it's got numbers, it starts to express itself, force itself, until it gets to a point where you get an offer. And so this guy's saying it is all right to make them our slaves. That's the doctrine. To fight, kill, and enslave Christian infidels. It's not negotiable and a must. These are the words of the extremist Yoruba Alpha. He's not an extremist. This is the key to this. It's not. That isn't extreme. That is doctrine of Islam. And people really need to start to realize that this is exactly what plays out in this this game. And I have another one. Where is it? I think it might be this one. So this takes you back to 1480. And they were called the Martyrs of Otranto. So when the Islamists invaded this place, it was a 15-day siege. The Ottoman forces stormed the southern Italian city of Otranto, slaughtering 12,000, enslaving 5,000, and then beheading 800 Christians who refused to convert to Islam. And this is the offer that you get. You get the offer to convert. If you say no, then you have to pay them a tax. And if you say no to that, they do war against you. But what they do is they tend to, and then they'll enslave you if it gets to the war part. And what they do is chop the arms off the males if they don't behead you, because it's only the children and the females that they want to enslave. And I think you know why. They're allowed to have more than one wife, whatever is in the possession of the right arm in relation to wives. So I know they say you can only have 3, but Muhammad had 11. When he died, he had 9. So this is real stuff, and I know people don't want to face it. But this is how it works. And like I've said before, you really would have to study the book, to study the hadiths, and study the history to know that that's how it works. And that's a sad state of affairs, but it is how it works, whether you like it or not. Of course, the Zionists are a bit more subtle. And what they're after is putting it under the Noahide, because the Noahide trust is expecting to remove our estates and put it into this new trust, which would then mean you have no rights, your estate's gone completely, you have no ancestral rights, you have no claims through your state, because you are no longer classed as a legal entity. You're a complete goy, basically. And or you might say Gentile if they want to be a bit more pleasant about it. But a goy pretty much describes anybody not of the creed and of the nations. And of course, the law is that they're collecting the nations lost. Now we know why. So the options, whichever one you choose, are not good. They're not good at all. You probably have more chance of keeping things together if you went on the Zionist ilk, I might say. But that's just looking at doctrine and method. I'm not trying to encourage anybody either way, because of course for me they're both neither come up anything close to the culture that I was born into, and that's my educated opinion. Take it or leave it, it doesn't matter. But still, we always have the chance to not go to war with any and other, if everybody sort of thought, well, actually, that is quite correct. We're all being dragged into this hellhole on the negative aspects of all of each of the religions. And that is pretty much where it's at, ladies and gentlemen. And we have to blame ourselves for getting to that point. We can't always blame these people just do what they do because they're worshipping Tanit. You know it as Baal, but actually it's the Tanit that these Baal worshippers are actually invoking and operating for. So that's running the show. They've set it up for you. Take a choice. And what a sad state of affairs from a civilization to La La Land in what? 100 years. 100 years, my God. So who's joined us? Then we'll kick on with that paper. It's interesting. Like I said, we don't have to go through it all. If it's boring, you're stupid, that's fine. But it will be up as a record for anybody that wants to fully investigate a bit more of an insight into what is this Khazaria. Now, if you look at the start image, what I tried to find was a map that clearly showed the Silk Route. So the red lines represent trade routes through Khazaria. Now, the main one is the middle one, which is the Silk Road. Now, there are quite a lot that come up from Byzantine as well, so they've missed quite a few off here. But basically, there were a lot of trade routes that had to go through Khazaria. And of course, as I've mentioned before, from records held in China and across Europe, this is where the name stealers were robbing wealthy people and then taking their place. and so taking over the line eventually. And it's not changed. This is what they've been doing all over the shop. This is what they did in the US. The old families, the old WASP families, were basically taken over by these new groups, and they became that family. There's even signs of that in JFK's family through the Walkers. But it's endemic, and I would suggest that that's the same that's taken place in Blighty and across Europe. They come in and they take over the bloodlines. So for centuries they get away with it. Everybody thinks, but in fact it's these Baal worshippers that have took it over completely, and the inner circle is moving everything always to this time today, while everybody else believes they're operating in the correct manner. So that's how they've done it. This is how they've done it, and this is where we're at now. We're at the point where they are ready to pull this all in and make it theirs. But it doesn't have to be that way. As we've discussed in the last few live streams, their claim on everything is a paper house of cards. It's not real. It's not real, this empire. It's just agreements, deeds, contracts said, contracts claimed. It's not real. The land's still the land. We still live on it. But through these contracts, through these massive collections of land, through nature reserves and trusts, they have taken command over what is ours, and it's backed in courts because it's paper. The fiction. It's all about the money, the accounting. And of course in 1933, away with the gold, we became the collateral for the IMF's loans, which then funds government, which is interesting, and it also is the foundation of the stock market. Your pensions are investing in these estates, these bonds. It's and as we looked at last week, as AI said, that actually the elite creditors, which they're not the creditors, we are actually the creditors, they need both systems to operate. And so even though we look at all this debt, when you actually start to understand how this game works, the debt is important. It's important to the financial system as much as the credit, because they can swap things around and pay what they want anytime they want. But another part of the debt reduction is to kill the old school, kill the people that are costing the system, that haven't taken back their estate. You've had a pension, a measly pension, when you could have had access to your estate. It's so clever. And of course you're bringing in immigrants, new estates, brand spanking new ones, start again. It's a sick system, but it's paper. It's a house of cards, really is. If everybody just realised, actually, this is all ours, they can all get stuffed. We're not listening to the rules and regulations. We don't go with the National Trust, Heritage Trust, whatever trust they want to call themselves. They don't have any command, only in the sense that they've had contracts with themselves and we haven't pulled them on it. So it's only be a case of pulling them on it, and it ends across the globe. But that might just be a little bit too way out there for most people to comprehend. And as I said earlier, this is the reason why I don't further my actions any outside of what I do, because it just isn't. There isn't the energy there. People don't understand this stuff. They'd rather go with the theatre of it, the entertainment side of it. So it's reptilians, it's aliens, and all this stuff really excites people. And that tends to be where they're at. But now you can see UK politics is split into absolute Labour, Islam, Reform, Restore, Tories. I don't know where Liberals are at. Trump. So they're going to get the Third World War going, aren't they? Let's have it. Especially what you look at what's going on outside here today. That's definitely on the cards. I can see it. Not only can you see it now, you can actually feel it in some places. You go, I were in London earlier this week. It's a while since I've been to London, but London isn't London. And it weren't London last time I went. Well, 10 years ago, and I used to go quite a lot in comparison to what it was like when I used to go when I was a young'un. Interesting, on the motorway coming back, because I was stuck for 2.5 hours. the rhythms in a lot of these cars that were coming up alongside were like being in jungle. And it was like, ooh, it's definitely all changing here down the south anyway. So yeah, it's game on, ladies and gentlemen. It's game on for sure, which is sad, but never mind. Right, so tonight's gig is the Khazars are definitively explained, and it does definitively explain it. So it's written by a guy, A.B. Cryer. It's a long piece, but we won't have to go through it all. As I said, it'll just be up for people that want to see it. And he says the conventional long name was Khazar Khaganate. The common name is Khazaria, and the era that he's looking at is Middle Ages, but it does go back to 650. So he says the status of the Khaganate, the year that we're starting here is 650, and the year end would be 969. And then he goes through the leaders in each era. The first was Urbis, 650. Bulan was the second leader in the 8th century. Leader 3, Obadiah, 9th century. Zachariah, Manasseh, Benjamin, Aaron, Joseph, David, Georgios. Now, I'm sure you've heard them names before. Have you not? So, that's, as you're looking at it from 650, I suppose Urbis is probably the one that doesn't actually, and maybe Bulan, but that's apparently where that cut off when the Russians state said you must choose one because you're insane. We can't let you carry on killing everybody and eating children. You have to pick a religion. And so the story goes, they chose Judaism, while still continuing to worship Baal or Tanit. So, there you go. That's the basic chronology of what this piece is looking at. So I said, it's A.B. Cryers wrote this. It says the Khazars were a semi-nomadic Turkic people who established a major commercial empire in the late 6th century CE, spanning modern southeastern Russia, southern Ukraine, and western Kazakhstan. Interesting, is it not, that they intend, it would appear, to move the city to Kazakhstan. So when you can grasp that, Americans, you need to start to realise that this shill program that's going on at the moment, where everybody in America is supposed to believe that Trump is dissolving his self from the city in London, it's only because the city is up anchoring, the ship is sailing. And so, of course, what they want to do is make it look like the city has ended only because it's moved out to London. I mean, that is something an infant could take on board because, obviously, it's so ridiculous. But ultimately, what they're doing, it's all being taken apart and it's going to be reformed under this Exelar Kingdom idea, with the Noahide law system being the administration of all non-PCIs. And that is what's going on. So this nonsense of Trump's not doing anything of the sort. Trump is still fleecing the US, not only through the UK, but also, through the city, but also directly to China. You'd be surprised if you really got down and saw what Trump is doing in relation to handing land, power to China, just in the same way as it's happened here. I saw something the other day that all the these tower networks that they're putting up across Europe are Chinese owned. We think it's Vodafone, but when you get down to the nitty-gritty, it's actually Chinese companies that run it all, and the company that set it all up has been bankrupt for quite some time, so work that one out. Now, that goes against quite a lot of financial rules, especially when it comes to insurance. But that's the situation we've got. Why would the UK government decry Huawei while letting them stick their tech all over the country? Well, of course, because it's not China per se. It's this East India conglomerate, private racketeers who have now took over the entire globe and can play this one nation off against the other with ease. So that's pretty much the situation. And so Kazakhstan did also make a part of what we know as Kazakhstan. Okay, so I've got a piece I'll put up about that. The contracts, as we've looked at, are probably all being held at Rothschild Island down in the Antarctic. So it says it was the most powerful polity to emerge from the breakup of the Western Turkic Khaganate, astride a major artery of commerce between Eastern Europe and southwestern Asia. Khazaria became one of the foremost trading empires of the early medieval world, commanding the western marches of the Silk Road and playing a key commercial role as a crossroad between China, the Middle East, the Kievan Rus for some 3 centuries. The Khazars dominated the vast area extending from the Volga-Don steppes to the eastern Crimea and the northern Caucasus. Although they were a confederation of different Turkic-speaking peoples, the precise origins and nature of the Khazars are uncertain, since there is no surviving record in the Khazar language, and the state was multilingual and polyethnic. Their native religion is thought to have been Tengrism, like that of the northern Caucasian Huns or other Turkic peoples, although the multi-ethnic population seems to have included pagans, Jews, Christians and Muslims, although there is evidence that the ruling elite of the Khazars had converted to Rabbinic Judaism in the 8th century. The scope of the conversion to Judaism within the Khanate remains uncertain. Excuse me. Effects. The Khazars are variably believed to have contributed to the ethnogenesis of numerous peoples, including the Khazars, the Hungarians, the Kazakhs, the Don and Zaporizhian, the Cossacks, Kamluks or Kumiks, Kimchaks, Krimchaks, Crimean Karyates, Kasangars, Mountain Jews and Subotniks. The late 19th century saw the emergence of the Khazar myth, the theory that the core of today's Ashkenazi Jews are descended from a hypothetical Khazarian Jewish diaspora that migrated westward into France and Germany. Linguistic and genetic studies have not supported the theory, and despite occasional support, most scholars view it with considerable skepticism. The theory is sometimes associated with anti-Semitism. Well, again, how ridiculous is that? So whoever's wrote this is clearly either shilling and covering certain points up, or he really doesn't understand. But one would think, if you're going to go into this degree of a study on it, you're going to also have fully understood what Semitism is. And of course it is a group of languages specific to the Levant and Northern Africa, not Khazaria. They intend to speak Yiddish, which is not a Semitic language. So it is associated with anti-Semitism, of course, because that's what they want it to be. But there's no truth of fact in that statement and claim. In Oghuz Turkic languages, the Caspian Sea is still named the Khazar Sea, reflecting the enduring legacy of the medieval Khazar state. Etymology. Gayula Nemeth, following Zoltan Gambox, derived Khazar from a hypothetical Khazar, reflecting a Turkic root, Khaz, to ramble to Rome, being a hypothetical retracted variant of common Turkic Kez. However, Andras Rona Taz objected that Khaz is a Gauls word. In the fragmentary Tez and Turkic inscriptions of the Ugar Empire, 744 to 840, the form Khazar is attested, although uncertainty remains whether this represents a personal or tribal name. Gradually, other hypotheses emerged. Louis Bazin derived it from Turkic Khaz, tyrannize, oppress, or to terrorize, on the basis of its phonetic similarity to the Ugar tribal name Khazar. Rona Tas connects Khazar with Kisar and the Pahlavi transcription of the Roman title Caesar. Ooh, Pahlavi, Pallavicini. It's a bit more insight into origin of that name. D.M. Dunlop tried to link the Chinese term for Khazars to one of the tribal names of the Ugar or Turquoise Oghuz, namely the Khazar, Chinese Gisa. The objections are that Ugar Gisa Khazar was not a tribal name, but rather a surname of the chief of the Sigi tribe, or Sogdian Sikari of the Torkus Orgus. And that in Middle Chinese, the ethnonym Khazars was always prefaced with Tuju, then still reserved for Gok Turks and their splinter groups, Teju Kisa Bu or Teja Hessa, and Khazar's first syllable is transcribed with different characters, which is used to render the syllable Ka in the Uighur word Khazar. While it is far from the given that the Khazars are not signifying a multi-ethnic and multilingual cluster of peoples and clans, some more nomadic, some less, it doesn't include that some clans or splinter groups or even rulers, as identified with the names of the Khazars in the variety of ways it has been expressed. After their conversion, it is reported that they adopted the Hebrew script, and it is likely that although speaking a Turkic language, the Khazar chancellery under Judaism probably corresponded in Hebrew. But there's a lot of probablys and maybes in there. Linguistics. Determining the origins and nature of the Khazars is closely bound with theories of their languages, but analysis of their languages' origins is difficult, since no indigenous records in the Khazar language survive, and the state was polyglot and polyethnic, whereas the royal or ruling elite probably spoke an eastern variety of the common Turkic. The subject tribes appear to have spoken varieties of Ugaric languages, a language variously identified with the Bulgar, Chuvash, and Hunnic language, but you will notice there's no Semitic languages in there. The latter based upon the assertion of the Persian historian Istakari. The Khazar language was different from any other known tongue. Alano As was also widely spoken. Eastern Common Turkic, the language of the royal house and its core tribes, in all likelihood, remained the language of the ruling elite, in the same way that Mongol continued to be used by the rulers of the Golden Horde, alongside of the Kipchak languages spoken by the bulk of the Turkic tribesmen that constituted the military force of this part of the Sinigizid Empire. Similarity, Ugaric, like Qipak and Turkic in the Josid realm, function as one of the languages of government. One method for tracing their origins consists in the analysis of the possible etymologies behind the ethnonym Khazar, ethnonym the Khazar. My apologies, I'm getting a few words upside down. Nobody's telling me I can't hear. Okay. Evening, Pedram. Evening, Jerry. Evening, Kerry. Evening, Ulick. Evening, Paul. Evening, June. Evening, PY Music. Musil today is rung in and said he's a girl and he's going to get bladdered. That's all I know. He's now decided to be a girl and he's off to get bladdered. So that's all I heard, really. Now, history. For most of its history, Khazaria served as a buffer state between the Byzantine Empire, the nomads of the northern steppes, and the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates, having previously been Byzantium's proxy against the rival Sasanian Empire. Around 900, the Byzantines began encouraging the Alans to attack Khazaria. This move aimed to weaken Khazar control over Crimea and the Caucasus and facilitate imperial diplomacy and proselytizing towards the powerful Kievan Rus in the north. By 969, Sviatoslav I of Kiev, the ruler of the Kievan Rus, along with his allies, conquered the Khazar capital of Atil, ushering the decline and disintegration of Khazaria by the mid-11th century. Tribal origins and early history. So they were certainly spread around. And we're talking again in the time of the Crusades, are we not? Tribal origins and early history. The tribes that were to compromise the Khazar Empire were not an ethnic union, but a congress of steppe nomads and peoples who came to be subordinated and subscribed to a core Turkic leadership. Many Turkic groups, such as the Ugaric speakers, including the Saragurs, the Ogurs, Onagurs, and Bulgars, who earlier formed part of the TL Confederation, are attested quite early having been driven west by the Sabirs, who in turn fled the Pannonian Avars and began to flow into the Volga-Caspian Pontic zone from as early as the 4th century, and are recorded by Priscus to reside in the western Eurasian steppe as early as 463. They appear to stem from Mongolia and southern Siberia in the aftermath of the fall of the Hunnic Xingnu nomadic polities. A variegated tribal federation led by these Turks, probably comprising a complex assortment of Iranian peoples, Proto-Mongols, Uralic speakers and Paleo-Siberian peoples, vanquished the Ruran Khaganate of the hegemonic Pannonian Avars in 552, who swept westwards, taking in their train other steppe nomads and peoples from Sogdia. The ruling family of this confederation may have hailed from the Ashina tribe of the western Turkic Khaganate, although Konstantin Zuckerman regards Ashina and their pivotal role in the formation of the Khazars with skepticism. Golden notes that Chinese and Arabic reports are almost identical, making the connection a strong one, and conjectures that their leader may have been Urbis Segai, who lost power and was killed around 651. Moving west, the confederation reached the land of the Akatziri, who had been important allies of Byzantium in fighting off Attila's army. The rise of the Khazar state. An embryonic state of Khazaria began to form sometime after 630, when it emerged from the breakdown of the largest first Turkic Khaganate of the Gokturks and Gokturk armies. Gokturk armies had penetrated the Volga by 549, ejecting the Avars, who were then forced to flee to the sanctuary of the Pannonian Basin. The Ashina clan appeared on the scene by 552, when they overthrew the Rurans, who established the first Turkic Khaganate, whose self-designation was Turuk. By 568, those Gokturks were probing for an alliance with Byzantium to attack the Sasanian Empire. An internecine war broke out between the senior Eastern Gokturks and the junior Western Turkic Khaganate some decades later. When on the deathbed of Taspar Khagan, a succession dispute led to a dynastic crisis between Taspar's chosen heir, the Atpa Khagan, and the ruler appointed by the tribal high council, Ashina Shetu, the Ishbaru Khagan. By the first decades of the 7th century, the Ashina Tong Yabedu Ogan managed to stabilize the Western Division. Upon his death, after providing crucial military assistance to Byzantium in routing the Sasanian army in the Persian heartland, the Western Turkic Khaganate dissolved under pressure from the encroaching Tang dynasty armies and split into two competing federations, each consisting of 5 tribes, collectively known as the 10 Eros. We've seen Eros before. Or On-Ok. Both briefly challenged Tang hegemony in eastern Turkestan. To the west, two new nomadic states arose in the meantime: Old Great Bulgaria under Kubrat and Dulu clan leader, and the Nishibi subconfederation, also comprising of 5 tribes. The Dulu challenged the Avars in the Kuban River Sea of Azov and area, while the Khazar Khaganate consolidated further westwards, led apparently by an Ashina dynasty. With a resounding victory over the tribes in 657, engineered by General Su Dingfang, Chinese overlords imposed to their east after a final mop-up operation in 659. But the two confederations of Bulgars and Khazars fought for supremacy on the western steppe land, and with the ascendancy of the latter, the former either succumbed to Khazar rule, or as under Asparuk of Bulgaria, Kubrat's son shifted even further west across the Danube to lay the foundations of the First Bulgarian Empire in the Balkans. The Khazar Khaganate thus took shape from the ruins of this nomadic empire, which broke up under pressure from the armies of the Tang dynasty to the east, sometimes between 630 and 650. You see, a lot of these immigrants are coming in from these areas, by the way, and that has to be taken on board. I know people still run on the refugee idea and see Syria, you see Palestine, Lebanon, Yemen and such, but actually where these people are actually coming from is these old Khazar states, even Kazakhstan. A lot of these Berbers are from Kazakhstan, but of course they claim to be Turkish, but they're not, and that comes direct from them. I spoke to them. The Khazar Khaganate thus took shape from the ruins of this nomadic empire, which broke up under pressure from the armies of the Tang dynasty to the east, sometime between 630 and 650. After their conquest of the Lower Volga region to the east and an area westward between the Danube and the Dnieper, and their subjugation of the Onogur or Bulgar Union, sometime around 670, a properly constituted Khazar Khaganate emerges, becoming the westernmost successor state of the formidable Gokturk Khaganate after its disintegration. According to Almeljian Pritsak, the language of the Onogur Bulgar Federation was to become the lingua franca of Khazaria as it developed into what Lev Gumilev called a steppe Atlantis, steppe Najav Atlantida. Historians have often referred to this period of Khazar domination as the Pax Khazarica, because the state became an international trading hub that permitted Western Eurasian merchants safe passage across it to conduct business without interference. The high status soon to be accorded to this empire to the north is attested by the Farsnama in 1100, which relates that the Sasanian emperor Khosrau I placed 3 thrones by his own, one for the king of China, a second for the king of Byzantium, and a third for the king of the Khazars. Although anachronistic in retro-dating the Khazars to this period, the legend by placing the Khazar Khagan on a throne of equal status to the rulers of the other 2 superpowers attests to the reputation of the Khazars had long enjoyed in history. So, as I've said before, you know, the Mongols and the Chinese have had ancient hatred of each other. And so, if it is indeed that their origin is of the Mongol race, fleeing ever westward through wars with China, then it would make sense then as to why we have Chinese influence over in this area, because of course clearly they were trying to stamp out their ultimate enemy, the Mongols. And as Mother Shipton says, she puts the blame squarely at the feet of the Yellow Race for trying to turn the world into 2 camps. And of course people then assume China, but actually we're dealing with this area here, and that the Chinese race in question would be the Mongolian Turkic tribes, who through their expert means of finance, because of course there's got to be a Phoenician ideology in this, then they've managed to take over everything. And while they call themselves Jews, they're clearly not. But that only works while Jews believe them, in the same way that the elites today call themselves Christian. It only works if the Christians believe them, which of course they didn't when it comes to the Vatican, because they all left through the 80s and in the 90s because Vatican II started to kick in. So these Johnny-come-latelys only have power while you still believe you're serving the same, when in fact it's this bunch running the whole show. Khazar state, culture and institutions. Royal diarchy with sacred Khaganate. Khazaria developed a diarchy, dual leadership, typical among Turkic nomads, consisting of the Khagan Bek and a Khagan. The emergence of this system may be deeply entwined with the conversion to Judaism. According to Arabic sources, the Khagan Bek was called an Isa, and the greater a Khagan, or blah 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 blah. The former managed and commanded the military, while the greater king's role was primarily sacral and less concerned with daily affairs. The greater king was recruited from the Khazar house of notables, and in an initiation ritual was nearly strangled until he declared the number of years he wished to reign. on the expiration of which he would be ritually killed by the nobles. Similarly, Ahmed ibn Fadlan wrote that there was a maximum limit on the number of years of a king's reign, and if a Khagan had reigned for at least 40 years, his courtiers and subjects felt his ability to reason would become impaired by old age. They would then execute him. The deputy ruler would enter the presence of the reclusive great king only with great ceremony, approaching him barefoot to prostrate himself in the dust and then light a piece of wood as a purifying fire while waiting humbly and calmly to be summoned. Particularly elaborate rituals accompanied a royal burial. At one period, travellers had to dismount, bow before the ruler's tomb and then walk away on foot. Subsequently, the charismatic sovereign's burial place was hidden from view, with a palatial structure, or paradise, constructed and then hidden under rerouted river water to avoid disturbance by evil spirits and later generations. Such a Kurok taboo royal burial ground is typical of inner Asian peoples. Both the Isa and the Hakwan converted to Rabbinic Judaism sometime in the 8th century, while the rest, according to the Persian traveller Ahmed ibn Rusta, probably continued to follow traditional religion. Now, of course, we've discussed before, haven't we, that Rabbinical Judaism isn't the Torah Judaism, it's the specific branch of Judaism that was formed after the destruction of the Second Temple. So it's a completely different form, but it's obviously it's the Talmud that runs the show for these guys. Ruling elite. The ruling stratum, like that of the later Singisids with the Golden Horde, was a relatively small group that differed ethnically and linguistically from its subject peoples, meaning that Alano AS and Oguric Turkic tribes, who were numerically superior within Khazaria. The Khazar Khwagans, while taking wives and concubines from the subject populations, were protected by the Khwarezmian Guard Corps or Comitatus Warband called the Arsia. But unlike many other local polities, they hired mercenary soldiers. At the peak of the empire, the Khazars ran a centralized fiscal administration with a standing army of some 7,000 to 12,000 men, which could, at need, be multiplied 2 or 3 times that number by inducting reserves from noble retinues. Other figures for the permanent standing army indicate that it numbered as many as 100,000. They controlled and exacted tribute from 25 to 30 different nations and tribes inhabiting the vast territories between the Caucasus and the Aral Sea, the Ural Mountains and the Ukrainian steppe. Khazar armies were led by the Khagan Bek and commanded by subordinate officers known as Tarkans. When the Bek sent out a body of troops, they would not retreat under any circumstances. If they were defeated, survivors were executed. Settlements were governed by administrative officials known as Tuduns. In some cases, such as the Byzantine settlements in southern Crimea, a Tudun would be appointed for a town nominally within another polity's sphere of influence. Other officials in the Khazar government included dignitaries referred to by Ibn Fadlan as Jawashigar and Kundar, but their responsibilities are unknown, and that comes from books and literature. Demographics. It's been estimated that 25 to 28 distinct ethnic groups made up the population of the Khazar Khwaganate, aside from the ethnic elite. The ruling elite seem to have been constituted out of 9 tribes or clans, themselves ethnically heterogeneous, spread over perhaps 9 provinces or principalities, each of which would have been allocated to a clan. In terms of caste or class, some evidence suggests that there was a distinction, whether racial or social is unclear, between white Khazars, Ak Khazars, and black Khazars, Khwara Khazars. The 10th century Muslim geographer Al-Istakari claimed that the white Khazars were strikingly handsome with reddish hair, white skin and blue eyes, while the black Khazars were swarthy, verging on a deep black as if they were some kind of Indian. Many Turkic nations had a similar political but not racial division between a white ruling warrior caste and a black class of commoners. The consensus among mainstream scholars is that Istakari was confused by the names given to the two groups. However, Khazars are generally described by early Arab sources as having a white complexion, blue eyes, and reddish hair. The ethnonym in the Tang Chinese annals, Ashina, often accorded a key role in the Khazar leadership, may reflect an Eastern Iranian or Tocharian word, Courtney's Saka Asiena, or blue, Middle Persian, Axiena, or dark-coloured, and Tokharan Asna blue dark. The distinction appears to have survived the collapse of the Khazarian Empire. Later in Russian chronicles, commenting on the role of the Khazars in the Magyarization of Hungary, refer to them as white augurs and Magyars as black augurs. Studies of the physical remains, such as skulls and cycle, have revealed individuals belonging to the Slavic, other European, and few Mongolian types. Now, of course, Saka. Now we're looking at the tribes that made and from which Buddha came from. Okay, and the Saka are also classed as Scythians. So, although we're looking at one particular area, the idea of Saka and Scythians are a much broader group of tribes as opposed to just this Mongolian Turkic group. So, even though they're mixed in, you've got to just be a little bit careful here that we're not mixing up Scythians with the Baal worshippers that we know as the Khazars or Phoenicians. So it's still subtle stuff, and obviously I've looked at a lot of this in the past, but you can't really come to an absolute conclusion because it's just so vague, much of this stuff. But of course, it was the Scythians that defeated King Cyrus and prevented the expansion of the Second Temple, or, well, Babylonia and Persia. And that's worth taking note. So, interesting, isn't it, that they're using the ones that they actually were defeated by to take over other nations. Well, it's not just that they take over other nations. If you look at the Assyrian methods of war, it's very clear that one of the main methods once it invaded a country would be to import lots of foreigners from the last country they colonized and diluting and then moving big swathes of the inhabitants of the one they've just took into another one that they've took. And that way they use immigration to dilute each nation, and it lessens the potential of full-blown rebellions. The import and export of foreign wares and the revenues derived from taxing their transit was a hallmark of the Khazar economy, although it is said also to have produced isinglass. Distinctively among the nomadic steppe polities, the Khazar Khaganate developed a self-sufficient domestic Saltovo economy, a combination of traditional pastoralism, allowing sheep and cattle to be exported, extensive agriculture, abundant use of the Volga's rich fishing stocks, together with craft manufacture, with diversification in lucrative returns from taxing international trade, given its pivotal control of major trade routes. Well, the Silk Road for one, but there were a lot of trade routes went through Khazaria. The Khazar slave trade constituted one of the two great furnitures of slaves to the Muslim market, to slavery in the Abbasid Caliphate, the other being the Iranian Samanid emirs, supplying it with captured Slavs and tribesmen from the Eurasian Northlands. It profited from the latter, which enabled it to maintain a standing army of Khwarezm or Khwarezm Muslim troops. The capital Atil reflected the division. So you can see there from the get-go, these Khazars have held big chunks of Islam under their wing and used them as a military force. Okay, so when they say, you listen to some of these imams or the rabbis rather, that state that Islam is the broom, that's what they're referring to. So there's a long conjoined interconnection with these Khazars and the caliphates in Eastern Europe. Okay. The capital Atil reflected the division. Khorasan on the western bank, where the king and his Khazar elite, with a retinue of some 4,000 attendants, dwelt, and Itil proper to the east, inhabited by Jews. Christians, Muslims, and slaves, and by craftsmen and foreign merchants. The Khazar Khaganate played a role in the trade between Europe and the Muslim world in the early Middle Ages. People taken captive during the Viking raids in Europe, such as Ireland, could be transported to Hedeby or Brno in Scandinavia, and from there via the Volga trade route to Russia, where slaves and furs were sold to Muslim merchants. Okay, slavery is big in Islam. Make no mistake about it. In fact, it wasn't really Islam then; it was Mohammedans, and this is another edit that's been going on in a lot of these books in the late, say, from the mid 20th century, but even earlier than that. You know, the whole language has been changed. They've put some serious effort in here, I'll tell you. Where are we there? Where slaves and furs were sold to Muslim merchants in exchange for Arab silver, dirham and silk, which had been found in Burqa, Wallin and Dublin. During the 8th and 9th century, this trade route between Europe and Abbasid Caliphate passed via the Khazar Khaganate until it was supplanted in the 10th century by the route of Volga Bulgaria, Khwarezm, and the Samanid slave trade. Now, I know some Bulgarians who've come over here, and what they were telling me is how mafia-orientated the whole country is. You cannot earn a crust in Bulgaria without the mafia taking a massive chunk. And this is why a lot of them are fleeing over here. So they're not into the system over there in Bulgaria. Even though if you go for an holiday, you don't get to see any of that. But that's what it's all about. The ruling elite wintered in the city and spent from spring to late autumn in the fields. A large irrigated green belt, drawing on channels from the Volga River, lay outside the capital, where meadows and vineyards extended for some 20 farsakhs, which is 60 miles. While custom duties were imposed on traders and tribute and tithes were executed from 25 to 30 tribes, with a levy on one sable skin, squirrel pelt, sword, dirham per hearth, or ploughshare, or hides, wax, honey, and livestock, depending on the zone. Trade disputes were handled by a commercial tribunal in Atul, consisting of 7 judges, 2 for each of the monotheistic inhabitants, Jews, Muslims, and Christians, and 1 for the pagans. Khazars and Byzantium. See also Byzantine Sasanian War of 602 to 628 and Third Perso-Turkic War. Byzantine diplomatic policy towards the steppe peoples generally consisted of encouraging them to fight amongst themselves. The Pechenegs provided great assistance to the Byzantines in the 9th century in exchange for regular payments. Byzantium also sought alliances with the Gokturks against common enemies in the early 7th century. One such alliance was brokered with the Western Turks against the Persian Sasanians, in the Byzantine Sasanian War of 602 to 628. The Byzantines called Khazaria Turkia, and by the 9th century referred to the Khazars as Turks. During the period leading up to and after the siege of Constantinople in 626, Heraclius sought help via emissaries, and eventually personally, from the Gokturk chieftain of the Western Turkic Khaganate, Tong Yabgu Quagan, in Tiflis, plying him with gifts and the promise of marriage to his daughter, Epiphania. Tong Yabgu responded by sending a large force to ravage the Persian Empire, marking the start of the Third Perso-Turkic War. A joint Byzantine-Turk operation breached the Caspian Gates and sacked Derbent in 627. Together they then besieged Tiflis, where the Byzantines may have deployed an early variety of traction trebuchets to breach the walls. After the campaign, Tong Yabgu is reported, perhaps with some exaggeration, to have left some 40,000 troops behind with Heraclius. Although occasionally identified with Khazars, the Gokturk identification is more probable, since the Khazars only emerged from that group after the fragmentation of the former sometime after 630. Some scholars argued that Sasanian Persia never recovered from the devastating defeat wrought by this invasion. Once the Khazars emerged as a power, the Byzantines also began to form alliances with them, dynastic and military. In 695, the last Heraclean emperor, Justinian II, nicknamed the Slit-Nosed, after he was mutilated and deposed, was exiled to Cherson in the Crimea, where a Khazar governor, Tudun, presided. He escaped into Khazar territory in 704 or 705 and was given asylum by Kagan Busir Glavan, who gave him his sister in marriage, perhaps in response to an offer by Justinian, who may have thought a dynastic marriage would seal by kinship a powerful tribal support for his attempts to regain the throne. The Khazarian spouse thereupon changed her name to Theodora. Busir was offered a tribe by the Byzantine usurper Tiberius III to kill Justinian. Warned by Theodora, Justinian escaped, murdering 2 Khazar officials in the process. He fled to Bulgaria, whose Khan Tervel helped him regain the throne. Upon his reinstatement, and despite Busir's treachery during his exile, he sent for Theodora. Busir complied, and she was crowned as Augusta, suggesting that both prized the alliance. Decades later, Leo III ruled 717 to 741 and made a similar alliance to coordinate strategy against the common enemy, the Muslim Arabs. He sent an emissary to the Khazar Kagan Bihar, who married his son, the future Constantine V, ruled 741-775, to Bihar's daughter, a princess referred to as Tsitzak, in 732. On converting to Christianity, she took the name Irene. Constantine and Irene had a son, the future Leo IV, in 775 to 780, who thereafter bore the sobriquet the Khazar. Leo died in mysterious circumstances after his Athenian wife bore him a son. Constantine VI, who on his majority call ruled with his mother, the Dowager, he proved unpopular, and his death ended the dynastic line of the Khazars to the Byzantine throne. By the 8th century, Khazars dominated the Crimea, 650 to 950, and even extended their influence into the Byzantine peninsula of Cherson until it was wrested back in the 10th century. Khazar and Farghanian mercenaries constitute part of the Imperial Byzantine Heteria bodyguard after its formation in 840, a position that could openly be purchased by a payment of £7 of gold. Arab-Khazar wars. During the 7th and 8th centuries, the Khazars fought a series of wars against the Umayyad Caliphate and its Abbasid successor. The First Arab-Khazar War began during the first phase of the Muslim expansion. By 640, Muslim forces had reached Armenia. In 642, they launched their first raid across the Caucasus under Abd al-Rahman ibn Rabia. In 652, Arab forces advanced on the Khazar capital, Balanjar, but were defeated, suffering heavy losses according to Persian historians such as al-Tabari. Both sides in the battle used catapults against the opposing troops. A number of the Russian sources give the name of Khazar Kagan from this period as Urbis and describe him as a scion of the Gokturk royal house, the Ashina. Whether Urbis ever existed is open to debate, as is whether he can be identified with one of the many Gokturk rulers of the same name. Due to the outbreak of the First Muslim Civil War and other priorities, the Arabs refrained from repeating an attack on the Khazars until the early 8th century. The Khazars launched a few raids into Transcaucasian principalities under Muslim domination, including a large-scale raid in 683 and 685 during the Second Muslim Civil War that rendered much booty and many prisoners. There is evidence from the account of Al-Tabari that the Khazars formed a united front with the remnants of the Gokturks in Transoxania. The Second Arab-Khazar War began with a series of raids across the Caucasus in the early 8th century. The Umayyads tightened their grip on Armenia in 705 after suppressing a large-scale rebellion. In 713 and 714, the Umayyad general Maslama conquered Derbent and drove deeper into Khazar territory. The Khazars launched raids in response to Albania and Iranian Azerbaijan, but were driven back by the Arabs under Hassan ibn al-Numan. The conflict escalated in 722 when an invasion by 30,000 Khazars into Armenia, inflicting a crushing defeat. Caliph Yazid II responded, sending 25,000 Arab troops north, swiftly driving the Khazars back across the Caucasus, recovering Durban and advancing on Balanjar. The Arabs broke through with Khazar defence and stormed the city. Most of its inhabitants were killed or enslaved, but a few of them managed to flee north. Despite their success, the Arabs had not yet defeated the Khazar army, and they retreated south of the Caucasus. In 724, the Arab general Al-Jarrah ibn Abdullah al-Hakami inflicted a crushing defeat on the Khazars in a long battle between the rivers Sirus and Araxes, then moved on to capture Tiflis, bringing Caucasian Iberia under Muslim suzerainty. The Khazars struck back in 726, led by a prince named Barjik, launching a major invasion of Albania and Azerbaijan. By 729, the Arabs had lost control of northeastern Transcaucasia and were thrust again into the defensive. In 730, Barjik invaded Iranian Azerbaijan and defeated Arab forces at Ardabil, killing the general Al-Dajar al-Hakami and briefly occupying the town. Barjik was defeated and killed the next year at Mosul, where he directed Khazar forces from a throne mounted with Al-Jazari's severed head. In 737, Marwan ibn Muhammad entered Khazar territory under the guise of seeking a truce. He then launched a surprise attack in which the Quagan fled north and the Khazars surrendered. The Arabs did not have enough resources to influence the affairs of Transcaucasia. The Khagan was forced to accept terms involving his conversion to Islam and subjects himself to the rule of the Caliphate. But the accommodation was short-lived because a combination of internal instability among the Umayyads and Byzantine support undid the agreement within 3 years, and the Khazars reasserted their independence. The suggestion that the Khazars adopted Judaism as early as 740 is based on the idea that, in part, it was a reassertion of their independence from the rule of both regional powers, Byzantium and the Caliphate, while it also conformed to a general Eurasian trend to embrace a world religion. Yeah, well, there's another side to that, that's that the Russian who were Muscovites back then, they forced them to convert to one because they were unimpressed with the sacrificial religion. Right. Whatever the impact of Marwan's campaigns was, warfare between the Khazars and the Arabs ceased for more than 2 decades after 737. Arab raids continued to occur until 741, but the control of the region was limited because maintaining a large garrison at Durban further depleted their already overstretched army. A third Muslim civil war soon broke out, leading to the Abbasid Revolution and the fall of the Umayyad dynasty in 750. In 758, the Abbasid Caliph al-Munsar attempted to strengthen diplomatic ties with the Khazars, ordering Yazid ibn Yusad al-Sulami, one of his nobles and military governors of Armenia, to take a royal Khazar bride. Yazid married a daughter of Khazar Khagan Bagator, but she died inexplicably, possibly during childbirth. Her attendants returned home, convinced that some members of another Arab faction had poisoned her, and her father was enraged. The Khazar general Ras Tarkhan invaded regions which were located south of the Caucasus in 762 and 764, devastating Albania, Armenia, and Iberia, and capturing Tiflis. Thereafter, relations between the Khazars and the Abbasids became increasingly cordial. Because the foreign policies of the Abbasids were generally less expansionist than the foreign policies of the Umayyads. Relations between the Khazars and the Abbasids were ultimately broken by a series of raids which occurred in 799. The raids occurred after another marriage alliance failed. And this time, of course, you've got the Vikings, haven't you, invading Blighty and all over the shop. And we're almost at the time of Alfred. So that's all going on. It would appear there is now a pope in Rome, or is the Rome that Alfred went to, was it Byzantine? It's hard to tell because obviously they've changed everything. Interesting. After the Khazars assumed control of Transcaucasia, at some time they set up towns including Samiran, Samsakli, Sambalat, Samaka and Samkalak, with the common fragment Sam meaning top or high or main. Khazars and the Hungarians. Around 830, a rebellion broke out in the Khazar Khaganate. As a result, 3 Khabar tribes of the Khazars, probably the majority of the ethnic Khazars, joined the Hungarians and moved through Lavidia to what the Hungarians called the Etelkoz, the territory between the Carpathians and the Dnieper River. The Hungarians faced their first attack by the Pechenegs around 854, though other sources state that an attack by Pechenegs was the reason for their departure to Etelkoz. The new neighbours of the Hungarians were the Varangians and the Eastern Slavs. From 862 onwards, the Hungarians, already referred to as the Ungri, along with their allies, the Khazars, started a series of raids from the Etelkoz into the Carpathian Basin, mostly against the Eastern Frankish Empire, or Germany, and Great Moravia, but also against the Lower Pannonian Principality and Bulgaria. Then they together ended up the outer slopes of Carpathians and settled there. So you've got the Frankish Empire going on here. Now, of course, the Franks worshipped in the groves. It was a almost utterly pagan system. I understand that system quite well. I actually seem to err to that side of things myself on a personal level. But it was interesting that the Franks actually joined with the monastic bishops in those days as well. And this is in truth why the Carolingians sort of like took it over. So from there you get Charles Martel and then Charlemagne, and this is where they start to sort of rebut this Islamic or Mohammedan influx into Europe. But also against Lower Pannonian Principality and Bulgaria. They then together ended up at the outer slopes of Carpathians and settled there. Rise of the Rus, which is the Russians, but a lot of Vikings involved as well. And the collapse of the Khazarian state. And the reason why in the 90s they destroyed the Crimea, in the Yugoslavian war, is because the Slavs still have the memory of all this history. And this is why they destroyed it as they did in the 90s under Clinton. And even the Jews themselves say that they're a very difficult group to control because they have this historic memory still. They haven't lost the root to the foundation. By the 9th century, groups of Varangian Rus developing a powerful warrior merchant system began probing south down the waterways controlled by the Khazars and their protectorate. The Volga Bulgarians, partially in pursuit of the Arab silver that flowed north for hoarding through the Khazarian Volga-Bulgarian trading zones, partially to trade in furs and ironwork. Northern mercantile fleets passing Atil were tithed as they were Byzantine Cherson. Their presence may have prompted the formation of a Rus state by convincing the Slavs, Mergia and the Chud to unite to protect common interests against Khazarian exactions of tribute. It's often argued that a Rus Khaganate, modelled on the Khazarian state, had formed to the east, and that the Varangian chieftain of the coalition appropriated the title of Kagan as early as 830. The title survived to denote the princes of Kievan Rus, whose capital Kiev was often associated with the Khazarian foundation. The construction of the Circle fortress, with technical assistance from Khazaria's Byzantine ally at the time, together with the minting of an autonomous Khazar coinage around the 830s, may have been a defensive measure against emerging threats from Varangians to the north and from the Magyars to the eastern steppe. By 860, the Rus had penetrated as far as Kiev and via the Dnieper, Constantinople. Alliances often shifted. Byzantium threatened the Varangian Rus raiders and would assist Khazaria, and Khazaria at times followed the northerners to pass through, allowed the northerners to pass through their territory in exchange for a portion of the booty. From the beginning of the 10th century, the Khazars found themselves fighting on multiple fronts as nomadic incursions were exacerbated by uprisings by former clients and invasions from former allies. The Pax Khazarica was caught in a pincer movement between steppe Pechenegs and the strengthening of an emergent Rus power to the north, both undermining Khazaria's tributary empire. According to the Shektu text, the Khazar ruler King Benjamin, 880 to 890, fought a battle against the allied forces of 5 lands, whose moves were perhaps encouraged by Byzantium. Although Benjamin was victorious, his son Aaron II faced another invasion, this time led by the Alans, whose leader had converted to Christianity and entered into an alliance with Byzantium, which under Leo VI, the Wise, encouraged them to fight against the Khazars. By the 880s, Khazar control of the middle Dnieper from Kiev, where they collected tribute from Eastern Slavic tribes, began to wane as Oleg of Novgorod wrestled control of the city from the Varangian warlords Askold and Deir, and embarked on what was to prove to be the foundations of the Rus Empire. The Khazars had initially allowed the Rus to use the trade route along the Volga River and raid southwards. See Caspian expeditions of the Rus according to Almas Udi. The Kagan is said to have given his assent on the condition that the Rus gave him half of the booty. In 913, however, 2 years after Byzantine concluded a peace treaty in the Rus, in 911, a Varangian furrow with Khazar connivance through Arab lands led to a request to the Khazar throne by the Khwarazmian Islamic Guard for permission to retaliate against the Lord Rus contingent on its return. The purpose was to revenge the violence the Rus razzias had inflicted on their fellow Muslim believers. The Rus force was thoroughly routed and massacred. The Khazar rulers closed the passage down the Volga to the Rus, sparking a war. In the early 960s, Khazar rule Joseph wrote to Hasdia ibn Shaprut about the deterioration of Khazar relations with the Rus. I protect the mouth of the river, Itil Volga, and prevent the Rus arriving in their ships from settling off by sea against the Ishmaelites, and equally all their enemies from setting off by land to Bab. See, they were called Ishmaelites and Mohammedans back then. This additions of Islam and Muslims it's a recent thing, you know. But then they didn't write down the Quran until almost 300 years after Muhammad was said to have revealed it. So, and that's a long time. It's a long time. In the same way that, according to current chronology, it took 300 and something years for Rome to form Christianity after the event. But of course we know that the canons were formed before that. They just weren't used by whatever it were that Rome carried out. Right, and of course we're talking about Byzantine, remember. Constantine moved his entire base to Constantinople, which is Byzantium. So everything seems, we get a miss a little bit here when we just keep talking about Rome and aiming it specifically in Italy. It's, you know, so much of the power. And the Byzantine Empire were running the entire Crimea and southern Asia right up until the 1990s destruction of Yugoslavia. You know, this is all a recent change of things that's taking place. Where are we there? I'm far down here right now. Okay, I've read that. I'm sorry. The Rus warlords launched several wars against the Khazar Khaganate and raided down to the Caspian Sea. The Shekter letters relate the story of a campaign against Khazaria by HLGW, recently identified as Oleg of Chernigov, around 941. in which Oleg was defeated by the Khazar general Pasak. The Khazar alliance with the Byzantine Empire began to collapse in the early 10th century. Byzantine and Khazar forces may have clashed in the Crimea, and by the 940s, Emperor Constantine VII Porphyrogenitus was speculating in De Administrando Imperio about ways in which the Khazars could be isolated and attacked. The Byzantines during the same period began to attempt alliances with the Pechenegs and the Rus, with varying degrees of success. A further factor undermining the Khazar Khaganate was a shift in Islamic roots at the time, as Muslims in Khwarezmia forged trade links with the recently converted Volga Bulgarian Muslims, a move which may have caused a drastic drop, perhaps up to 80% in the revenue base of Khazaria, and consequently a crisis in its ability to pay for its defence. Svyatoslav I finally succeeded in destroying Khazar imperial power in the 960s. So we're past Alfred and all that here. All that malarkey is going on, if that chronology is correct. In a circular sweep that overwhelmed Khazar fortresses like Sarkal and Tamatarka, and reached as far as the Caucasian Kasodians or Circassians, and then back to Kiev. Sarkal fell in 965, with the capital city of Atul following in 968 or 969. In the Russian Chronicle, the vanquishing of the Khazar traditions is associated with Vladimir's conversion in 986. According to the primary chronicle, in 986 Khazar Jews were present at the Vladimir disputation to decide on the prospective religion of the Kievan Rus. Whether these were Jews who had settled in Kiev or emissaries from some Jewish Khazar remnant state is unclear. Conversion to one of the faiths of the people of Scripture was a precondition to any peace treaty of the Arabs, whose Bulgar envoys had arrived in Kiev after 985. A visitor to Atul wrote soon after the sacking of the city that its vineyards and garden had been razed, and not a grape or raisin remained in the land, and not even alms for the poor were available. An attempt to rebuild may have been undertaken since Imban Hakwal and Al-Muqaddasi refer to it after that date, built by Al-Biruni's time of 1048, and it was in ruins. Aftermath, impact, decline and dispersion. Although Polyak argued that the Khazar kingdom did not wholly succumb to Svyatoslav's campaign, but lingered on until 1224, when the Mongols invaded Rus. By most accounts, the Rus-Oghuz campaigns left Khazaria devastated, with perhaps many Khazarian Jews in flight, and leaving behind at best a minor rump state. It left little trace except for some place names, and much of its population was undoubtedly absorbed in his successor hordes, Al-Muqaddasi writing circa 985. Mentions Khazar beyond the Caspian Sea as a district of war and squalor, with hunting many sheep and Jews. Kedronis mentions a joint Rus-Byzantine attack on Khazaria in 1016, which defeated its ruler Georgius Tzul. The name suggests Christian affiliations. The account concludes by saying that after Tzul's defeat, the Khazar ruler of the Upper Media, Sennacherib, had to sue for peace and submission. In 1024, Mstislav of Cheringov, one of Vladimir's sons, marched against his brother Yaroslav with an army that included Khazars and Kasodians in a repulsed attempt to restore a kind of Khazarian-type dominion over Kiev. Ibn al-Athir's mention of a raid of Fudlan, the Kurd, against the Khazars in 1030, in which 10,000 of his men were vanquished by the latter, has been taken as a reference to such a Khazar remnant, but Bartold identified this Fadlun as Fadl ibn Muhammad and the Khazars as either Georgians or Abkhazians. A Kievan prince named Oleg, grandson of Jaroslav, was reportedly kidnapped by Khazars in 1079 and shipped off to Constantinople, although more scholars believe that this is reference to the Kumans Kipchaks or other steppe peoples then dominant in the Pontic region. Upon his conquest of Tumutukaran, In the 1080s, Oleg gave himself the title Archon of Khazaria. In 1083, Oleg is said to have exacted revenge on the Khazars after his brother Roman was killed by their allies, the Polovtsky. After one more conflict with these Polovtskys in 1106, the Khazars faded from history. By the 13th century, they survived in Russian folklore only as Jewish heroes in the land of the Jews, Zemlya Jirovaskaya, whatever that means. By the end of the 12th century, Potatiak of Ratisbon reported travelling through what he called Khazaria and had little to remark on other than describing its minimum sectaries living amongst a desolation in perpetual mourning. The reference seems to be to the Karaites. The Franciscan missionary William of Rubruck likewise found only impoverished pastures in the lower Volga area, where Ital once lay. Giovanni di Pan del Carpine, the papal legate to the court of the Mongol Khan, Gayuk at the time, mentioned an otherwise unattested Jewish tribe, the Brutake, perhaps in the Volga region. Although connections are made to the Khazars, the link is based merely on common attribution to Judaism. The 10th century Zoroastrian Descartes registered the collapse of the Khazar power in attributing its eclipse to the enfeebling effects of false religion. The decline was contemporary to that suffered by the Transoxiana Samanid Empire to the east, both events paving the way for the rise of the great Seljuk Empire, whose founding traditions mention Khazar connections. Whatever successor entity survived, it could no longer function as a bulwark against the pressures east and south of nomad expansions. By 1043, Kimeks and Kipchaks, thrusting westward, pressured the Ogurs, who in turn pushed the Pechenegs towards Byzantium's Balkan provinces. Khazaria nonetheless left its mark on the rising states and some of their traditions and institutions much earlier. Tzitsak and Khazar, wife of Leo III, introduced into the Byzantine court the distinctive kaftan or riding habit of the nomadic Khazars, the Tzitsakion, and this was adopted a solemn element of imperial dress. The orderly hierarchical system of succession by scales to the Grand Principate of Kiev was arguably modelled on Khazar institutions via the example of the Rus Khaganate. The Proto-Hungarian Pontic tribe, while perhaps threatening Khazaria as early as 839, cycled practiced their institutional model, such as the dual role of the ceremonial Kendi Kundu, and Gyula administering practical and military administration as tributaries of the Khazars. A dissident group of Khazars, the Khwabars, joined the Hungarians in their migration westward as they moved to Pannonia. Elements within the Hungarian population can be viewed as perpetuating Khazar traditions as a successor state. Byzantine sources refer to Hungary as Western Turkey, in contrast to Khazaria and Eastern Turkey. The Gyula or Gyula line produced the kings of medieval Hungary through descent from Arpad, while the Khwabars retained their traditional longer and were known as Black Hungarians or Fekete Magyarország. Some archaeological evidence from the Sarajevo suggests the Khwabars practiced Judaism, since warriors gave the Jewish symbols were found there. Warrior graves, including menorahs, shofars, etrogs, lulavs, candle snuffers, ash collectors, inscriptions in Hebrew, and six-pointed star identical to the Star of David. Well, the six-pointed star is way older than Israel. It's nothing to do with it. Well, obviously it is, but it's nothing to do with this Israel. It's a way older symbol than that. The Khazar state was not the only Jewish state to rise between the fall of the Second Temple, 67 to 70 CE, and the establishment of Israel in 1948. A state in Yemen also adopted Judaism in the 4th century, lasting until the rise of Islam. The Khazar kingdom is said to have stimulated messianic aspirations for a return to Israel as early as Judah held Levi. In the time of the Egyptian vizier Al-Afdal Shahanshah, one Solomon ben Duji, often identified as a Khazarian Jew, attempted to advocate for a messianic effort for the liberation of and return of all Jews to Palestine. He wrote to many Jewish communities to enlist support. He eventually moved to Kurdistan, where his son Menachem some decades later assumed the title of Messiah, and raising an army for the purpose, took the fortress of Amidia, north of Mosul. His project was opposed by the rabbinical authorities, and he was poisoned in his sleep. One theory maintains that the Star of David, until then a decorative motif or magical emblem, began to assume its national value in late Jewish tradition from its earlier symbolic use by Menachem. That's interesting. The word Khazar is an ethnonym. Was last used in the 13th century by people in North Caucasus believed to practice Judaism. The nature of a hypothetical Khazar diaspora, or Jewish or otherwise, is disputed. Avram Ibn Dod mentions encountering rabbinical students descending from Khazars as far away as Toledo, Spain, in the 1160s. Khazar communities persisted here and there. Many Khazar mercenaries served in the armies of the Islamic Caliphates, and other state documents from medieval Constantinople attest to a Khazar community mingled with the Jews of the suburb of Pera. Khazar merchants were active in both Constantinople and Alexandria in the 12th century. So there's a lot of history to this place. And clearly, they weren't just Jews living there. There were Muslims and there were Christians, but mainly tied to Byzantium. So this place it's got a lot of history going on, has it not? Direct sources for the Khazar religion are not many, but in all likelihood they originally engaged in a traditional Turkic form of religious practices known as Tengrism, which focused on the sky god Tengri. Something of its nature may be deduced from what we know of the rites and beliefs of contagious tribes, such as the North Caucasian Huns. Horse sacrifices were made to this supreme deity. Rites involved offering to fire, water, and the moon, to remarkable creatures, and to gods of the road, Old Turk Yol Tengri, perhaps a god of fortune. Sun amulets were widespread as cultic ornaments. A tree cult was also maintained. Whatever was struck by a lightning, man, or object was considered a sacrifice to the high god of heaven. The afterlife, to judge from the excavations of their aristocratic tumuli, was much a continuation of life on earth, warriors being interred with their weapons, horses, and sometimes with human sacrifices. The funeral of one Tudorun in 711-12 saw 300 soldiers killed to accompany him to the other world. Ancestor worship was observed. The key religious figure appears to have been a shaman like Quam, and it was these Quasmim that were, according to the Khazar Hebrew conversion stories, driven out. Many sources suggest that a notable number of scholars have argued that the charismatic Ashina clan played a germinal role in the early Khazar state, although Zuckerman dismisses the widespread notion of their pivotal role as a phantom. The Ashina were closely associated with the Tengri cult, whose practices involved rites performed to assure a tribe of heaven's protective providence. The Kagan was deemed to rule by virtue of Kut, the heavenly mandate, good fortune to rule, Christianity. Khazaria long served as a buffer state between the Byzantine Empire and both the nomads of the North Steppes and the Umayyad Empire. After serving as Byzantium's proxy against the Sasanian Persian Empire, the alliance was dropped around 900. Byzantium began to encourage the Alans to attack Khazaria and weaken its hold on Crimea and the Caucasus, while seeking to obtain an entente with the rising Rus power to the north, which it aspired to convert to Christianity. Now, I've said before that some of the stuff I've studied in the past suggests that the Vikings, which weren't really called Vikings, but the Northmen, were all connected to Byzantium. So you could say it was the Roman Imperial Empire side of things, throwing itself across Europe and blighty. I don't think we get into any of this in here anyway, but on Khazaria's southern flank, both Islam and Byzantine Christianity were proselytizing great powers. Byzantine success in the north was sporadic, although Armenian Albanian missions from Derbent built churches extensively in maritime Dagestan, then a Khazar district. Buddhism also had exercised an attraction on leaders of both the eastern, 552-742, and western Khaganates, 552-659. the latter being the progenitor of the Khazar state. In 682, according to the Armenian chronicle of Mobses Daskshurense, the king of Caucasian Albania, Varas Trad, or Turdat, dispatched a bishop, Israel, to convert Caucasian Huns who were subject to the Khazars, and managed to convince Alp Luttur, a son-in-law of the Khazar Kagan, and his army to abandon their shamanizing cults and join the Christian fold. The Arab Georgian martyr Saint Abbo, who converted to Christianity within the Khazar kingdom around 779, describes local Khazars as irreligious. Some reports register a Christian majority, a Samanda or Muslim majorities. Conversion to Judaism is mentioned in the Khazar correspondence and medieval external sources. The authenticity of the form was long doubted and challenged, but the documents are now widely accepted by specialists as either authentic or as reflecting internal Khazar traditions. Archaeological evidence for conversion, on the other hand, remains elusive and may reflect either the incompleteness of excavations or that the stratum of actual adherence was thin. Conversions of steppe or peripheral tribes to a universal religion is a fairly well attested phenomenon, and the Khazar conversion to Judaism, although unusual, would not have been without precedent. Jews from both the Islamic world and Byzantium are known to have migrated to Khazaria during periods of persecution under Heraclius and Justin II, Leo III, and Romanus Lakapinos. For Simon Sharma, Jewish communities from the Balkans and the Bosphorus and Crimea, especially from Panticapaeum, began migrating to the more hospitable climate of pagan Khazaria in the wake of these persecutions, and were joined there by Jews from Armenia. The Genesia fragments, he argues, make it clear the Judaizing reform sent roots down to the whole of the population. The pattern is one of elite conversion preceding large-scale adoption of the new religion by the general population, which often resisted the imposition. One important condition for mass conversion was a settled urban state where churches, synagogues and mosques provided a focus for religion, as opposed to the free nomadic lifestyle of life on the open steppe. A tradition of the Iranian judo Tats claimed that the ancestors were responsible for the car conversion, a legend traceable to the 16th century Italian rabbi Judah Moscato attributed it to Yitzhak Hang Sangari. Both the date of the conversion and the extent of its influence beyond the elite, often minimized in some scholarship, are a matter of dispute, but at some point between 740 and 920 CE, the Khazar royalty and nobility appeared to have converted to Judaism. In part, it is argued, perhaps to deflect competing pressures from Arabs and Byzantines to accept either Islam or Christianity. The conversion of the Khazars to Judaism is an emotionally charged topic in Israel, and two scholars, Moshe Gil, 2011, and Shoal Stampfer, 2013, have challenged the authenticity of the medieval Hebrew documents and argue that the conversion of the Khazar elite to Judaism never happened. Alex M. Feldman is critical of Stampfer and Gil's dismissal of overwhelming textual and archaeological evidence of Khazarian Judaism, though agrees it is unlikely that Ashkenazim were descended from Khazarian Jews. He posits a middle ground which can simultaneously accept Khazarian Judaism and doubt the Khazar Ashkenazi descent theory advanced in Judaism genetic studies. Now, there's the history of it then. I'm not going to read any more, but there's quite a bit. Oh, wait a minute. We will just read this little bit because it's relative to what we're experiencing today. So, history of the discussions about Khazar Jewishness. The earliest surviving Arabic text that refers to Khazar Jewishness appears to be that which was written by Ibn Rustar, a Persian scholar who wrote an encyclopedic work on geography in the early 10th century. It is believed that Ibn Rustar derived much of his information from the works of his contemporary Abu al-Diyani, based in Central Asia. Christian of Stavelot, in his Expositio in Mattheum Evangelistrum of 860 to 870, refers to Khazari, presumably the Khazars, as living in the lands of Gog and Magog, who were circumcised and omnem Judaismum observat, observing all the laws of Judaism. New numismatic evidence of coins dated 837 to 8 bearing the inscriptions Ard al-Hazar, land of the Khazars, or Musa Razal Allah, Moses is the messenger of God, in imitation of the Islamic coin phrase Muhammad is the messenger of God. suggests to many the conversion took place in that decade. Olson argues that in 8378, evidence marks only the beginning of a long and difficult official Judaization that concluded some decades later. A 9th century Jewish traveller, Eldad HaDani, is said to have informed Spanish Jews in 883 that there was a Jewish polity in the east, and that fragments of the legendary 10 lost tribes, part of the line of Simeon and half-line of Manasseh, dwelt in the land of the Khazars, receiving tribute from some 25 to 28 kingdoms. And another view holds that by the 10th century, while the royal clan officially claimed Judaism, a non-normative variety of Islamization took place among the majority of Khazars. So, Gog and Magog, it's interesting. I just thought I'd just put that because it is important in what they're playing at today. So, I'll leave it there. There is more to see, but if this is interesting to you, obviously I'll put this whole document up. Now, there is a plethora of links to this data on here. It's massive. And at the bottom, I've put a link to the original author's page because, of course, there we have links. On his page is all the links to a lot of these sources and other references that he presents. So it's an interesting piece in the sense that it's not as clear-cut as people think. It looks to me like it were a place where rebels always moved to when they were getting knocked out or thrown out of places. But trade was its main coin. And, of course, we know that the foundation of what we're suffering and dealing with today is based in the power and might of the merchants, the merchant class. So, have Ashkenazim themselves, Ashkenazi people, been duped into believing that they're actually Jews when they could actually be anything, any one of the religions from that area? We have to work out, I think, people, how everybody's been sort of corralled into whatever belief system they're told they have to be. And clearly we can see that it's all moving to all-out war everywhere, which is, it's not going to serve anybody anywhere, is it? So it is an interesting document if you continue to read it. We've probably gone through the boring part, actually. There's a few more interesting bits in there. If that feeds, if that's interesting for you. But I just thought we'll get it out, then it's done. It's done and dusted. Right, so I'll just have a look at who's on. Pedram says, war news from Iran on local level. Human monster, not man, no inheritance rights. Okay, so he's going low. Appeared on border of my land where I live at my homestead. He had a baseball bat in his right hand and without context asked me why I did not approve of him. Is this a foreigner, Pedro? Appeared on border of my land. Okay. Hey, Jerry. I told him because he repeatedly had proclaimed that he had to steal water to irrigate his clan's lands in this ancient forest garden area. Okay, so people, alright, is that what's going on? Jerry says, on all the people they convinced it was okay to identify as whatever they like. Yeah, that's not a good idea. He repeatedly uttered that we were going to murder me. And I told him that I defend myself, and if murdered, I certainly will be revenged. Right, so you're having that kind of trouble over there. Where are they coming from, Pedram? North? He walked 50 yards and picked up a hunting rifle and fired a shot in my direction and fled. Ooh. I engaged my neighbours and police to disarm him and moved to investigate what his agenda was. So you got rid of him. The lesson learned, fellow Aryan Free Sovereign Republican people. Raise awareness, military territorial defence learning, martial arts, sports, prepare people who should prosecute judges and avenge. Yeah, absolutely. Don't let these people get away with it. They are getting away with it because nobody is pulling them to book. But there is a distinct rise now of people starting to realise what's going on. And I think with the recent sort of announcements from Rupert the Bear, I think people are now starting to really see the game somewhat, which has got to be a good thing. People need to get a grip with this stuff. And then we can start to consider, doing something about it. June says, Bulgaria does now join the Euro, another country they will ruin, of course, and spread all the mafia associations here. The Islamic failed state occupying Iran is utterly under Khazarian rule, and giving away Caspian Sea to Khazars and Persian Gulf to Arabs is the plan. Unlock Khazarian people in land and Mouse lock up. Yeah, I mean, these Khazarian peoples are responsible for a lot of this. We have to doubt. But they're not. According to someone I watched not long ago, actually, and it was a girl of these families, and she said that, yeah, they go to synagogue, to everybody outside, they're practicing Jews, but she said, no, we worship Baal. That is our religion. She said her mother and father call it Satanism. That's what they actually call it. So just because they're saying the Jews, it doesn't mean that that's what they're really doing. Inner circle, outer circle. Frank Byrne says, how are you, Sean? Newly Jerry in the chat. Evening, Frank. In the hood, no hassle in the castle, all peaches and cream. Thought I might have gone a bit over the top. No, you're alright, mate. Yeah, the first would be of done. Yeah, okay. Trains, no, not train. Why do I keep saying train? I'm not saying train. Eastern unit was walled off by a bloody trio: Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt. Then came along Kissinger, Brzezinski, Friedman, Greenbelt to lock us up in more walls made of piles of skull and bones. Yeah, Iron Curtain, Berlin Wall. Yeah, and Israel is walled in two. The concentration camp with its Khazars Sunder Commando abusing all people lured in and captured. Yeah, because they're intending to kill. I've got a piece actually from a rabbi from 50s where he's saying, unfortunately, my people, we're going to have to do this again, what they'd just done in Second World War, to bring in the Third World War, and it looks as if we're going to have to sacrifice a load more of our own people to get it going. So, yeah, they don't mind knocking their own off. Israel Walling too, yeah. Weefman says, this is fascinating, Sean. I have 285k pages to read. All reference, more work, thanks, no problem. Weefman. If Abrahamic sadomasochism and Khazari tyranny keep ravaging Earth, I could contemplate volunteering as ship surgeon on a Mars mission. Latest body count of January 26, jihadi massacring Aryan people of Iran is CA 100,000 murdered. 100,000 injured and evade hospitals to avoid arrest and execution. Bloody hell. And that's since January. Hi, Sean and all. Pedro, hope you're safe and well. This is Treen. There I knew I'd seen Treen. Hiya, Treen. Anyone diminishing January 26 war crimes committed by a coalition of Reza Pahlavi, Najaf, Babylonian clerics occupying Iran since 1979? Mossad infiltrators with regime ask if they investigated or just guess. Well, no, it's not good. Hazard called the name stealers or god eaters. Yep. Yeah, absolutely right, Treen. I do not leave Iran again. I stand my ground. This is it. People are running away everywhere, but you know, it's here first. If they can get it in, and then it spreads everywhere. That's the plan. Where are we? Quite right. I know people who return to Kurdistan with the same idea. They know what's going on, even amongst the leaders too. Yeah, it's everywhere. Exactly, Baal worship. Yep. These so-called leaders are not our people. No, I believe that too, Sean. I heard that. I opted to tell all, so all you arrange both defence and protection measures and jury and avenging arrangements in advance, so to take invaders and feel the pain when they trespass. Well, we're definitely heading into that direction. I mean, you can definitely sense that it's on the horizon. You can sense, you can feel it, you know. And it's really not good. Our poor offspring, we didn't bring our children up for this, did we? But unfortunately, that's where we're at. Okay, chaps and chapesses, of course I'll put this up, so if you're interested, you can have a look at it. Thanks for joining, everybody. Thanks for taking part. Mod Paul, thanks for modding. I hope you have a great week, and I, as usual, shall say, till the next time.
brought to